Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of What's Happening. I'm George Binns, and I'm here with my co-host, Gail Burke. And as you can see from the banner at the bottom of the picture, we're having another one of our discussions with the candidate. Tonight is Julie Flowers, candidate for Councilor-At Large. Welcome, Julie.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So we usually start these off with a very simple question. Why are you running?
Well, so when I was getting ready to go off to college from Beverly High School, this is what I thought I would do. I wanted to go into politics and think about public service in this capacity. And I ended up going on and doing something completely different. I'm a minister at First Baptist Church on Cabot Street now. And more recently, as I've sort of had the opportunity to work out in the community, I've been there for a little over 10 years, and a lot of my job puts me on the ground working with our young people, but connecting them with organizations like Beverly Bootstraps and Harbor Community Partners and Family Promise, organizations that I think Beverly is lucky to have in our community. It's also made me really aware that doing that work gives me this unique opportunity to really hear from people on the ground in Beverly, from residents, what they love about the city and what they hope for and what they need. And so being able to then return to this dream that I had about public service in this capacity and sort of flip over the public service coin. So hearing those voices and working to connect people with the services and organizations out there, and then being able to bring those voices and elevate them to the city level. That's what's inspired me to run.
Well, from what you hear from the voices on the street, what do you think are your priorities in terms of what would you want to change or improve relative to the city?
Sure. So I think one of the biggest topics from people right now, and I'm sure this is no surprise to you too, I'm sure you've heard this too, is development, questions about development in Beverly. So how much and where and how do we do it in a thoughtful way? And I think that's an important question for the city council, whoever's on it going forward, and for the mayor and the administration. They'll be tackling those questions.
What would your position be relative to this balance?
So, I think that every city needs some level of new growth, and to bring in that new growth money so that we can have the money needed to do some of these other kind of initiatives and services and fund our schools without putting all of that funding and the weight for that on the back of the taxpayers, the property owners. I think the question is, and where I would like to, if I were on the council, sort of pause and have some thoughtful conversation is, how do we balance that very real need for new growth with concerns for quality of life? And so that is things, to me, like traffic concerns and where we leave green space in our city for people to be able to have open space parks, access to the waterfront to be able to enjoy. How we think about our classroom size and how we continue to support our schools. So, from my perspective, a lot of the development on Rantoul Street has a real urban feel. And if there were a place in our city for urban feel, transit-oriented development, I think Rantoul is the right place for that. I would love to see, and if elected, be part of a conversation about how we could be really thoughtful about moving forward with topics such as Bass River rezoning and redevelopment. So thinking holistically about that space, what would we really like to see there? Where can we leave some green space open, access to the waterfront for residents? And because it's right on the waterfront, how can we do some resiliency planning and thinking before we develop there?
Given the amount of development that we've been seeing, do you think maybe it's time to stop and take a breath and not do any more development for the time being?
So the Bass River question, I think that's likely to be the next area that's going to be on the table for the city council, whoever is part of the council. And that is a place, I guess to your point, Gail, I think I would advocate taking a thoughtful pause there and doing some of that thinking, how do we want that area to holistically look? I think a good case can be made for what mixed use kind of development can bring into a city, but thinking about how we would like the finished product to look, where we can leave some open space. And I do have concerns because it's right on the water and because we have so much waterfront in Beverly, and because I think it's not a question, given what we've seen even this fall in other parts of our country, not a question of if we'll get a big storm that will cause some of our streets and city areas to flood, but when. How can we be prepared for that before we decide what we're going to put in some of these waterfront areas? I would be reticent to see us put development of any kind, but particularly housing, in areas where we have not done good resiliency planning to be able to ensure that residents are going to be safe when there's a storm.
One of the other questions that I have, and,
Yeah.
and you mentioned this,
Yeah.
excuse me, is about the all-day kindergarten.
Yes.
And you said you were in favor of it.
Yes.
On the other hand, I wonder, how do you propose to fund it? I know one of the other candidates mentioned that it would take about $600,000 to fund the all-day kindergarten. I think that's a big chunk of money. And how would you pay for that?
So the all-day kindergarten question, and George asked what I'm hearing out on the street, and that's definitely something that's out there on the street. I think it's a conversation that comes up in Beverly sort of perennially, often at the end of the budget process, though, right? So I think in the past few cycles, what we've seen is this pattern where the budgets are put together, and then when it comes to the end of the process, there's sort of a big push. There's a move that people really are disappointed that there still hasn't been a move on the kindergarten question, whether it's completely removing the fee or being able to talk about how we could gradually reduce the fee. And so then at the end of the process, there's this push to remove that fee. But it's really hard, I think, to be able to get that work done at the end of the budget process. So one of the things I would love to see and would love to be a part of is really getting in with the school committee, city council, the administration together right up front in January when the new budgets are beginning to be put together, and talk about what are the priorities for the city. I would advocate that for me, the full day kindergarten fee being reduced and then removed is a priority. And if that's one of our priorities, then how can we move towards being able to afford it? Because you're right, it is about a $600,000 fee. And so can we talk about our priorities as a city, and can we begin to also think about how we're budgeting? Because one of the things that I think is so wonderful right now in the city is how stable the city is financially. I think that's credit to the people who have done really smart budgeting work and financial work to build up a stabilization fund, to get the city's rainy day fund in good shape. And part of the way that that's been done, from my understanding, is by looking at the budget and being very careful in the budgeting process.
Well, the other part of that budgeting process and the financing of it has been the addition of fees.
Yes.
The kindergarten thing you're talking about is essentially a fee on the taxpayers.
Sure.
Same thing for all the sports programs.
Sure.
And every time you turn around, there's another fee. So talking about a stable tax base, you've got to start talking about the fees also. And every time you turn around, there's a new one. So I think the issue on priorities has to come down to is what is really important to the city as a whole.
Yeah.
And how do we meet those requirements without another fee on something else?
Sure. So, I would really advocate that part of what we could do to even begin to free up some operating money in the budget and then to put towards some of these priorities is, rather than budgeting as cautiously as we have, so overestimating perhaps what expenses will be and underestimating revenues, be able to just to bring those into sort of more realistic perspective, which would mean less surplus potentially at the end, but it would free up operating money to put towards some of these priorities.
And that comes up with the other question that's been running around on the blog, on the Prospect Hill neighborhood blog, of why can't we have 2 water meters for people so that they can split the load between what they're using in their garden or the swimming pool, as well as what goes into the sewer system. Because the sewer fee is twice the water fee. So it's a big swinger on a lot of people.
Yeah.
And yet we keep getting into this discussion of, well, how are we going to finance this and do this and make up money? And yet there's a surplus in the Southern Essex Sewer District Fund or Enterprise Fund. So there are people who are looking at that saying, why are we carrying a surplus and we can't make this happen? Same thing is true as a city. And I know the argument is that we've got a big bill coming for the middle school.
Yes, yes.
And we're going to have to start paying that down.
Right,
and we're going to run into a problem that one of these days the Fed is going to raise the interest rates and things will get to be very expensive. They didn't do it today, thank goodness. But sooner or later it's going to happen. So there is a balance that keeps coming up on finances, on redevelopment. We haven't mentioned the Folly Hill problem, that people would like to expand that to 700 units.
Potentially, yeah.
Yeah. And at the same time, you were talking earlier about, well, it's good to bring this in because that's more money in the coffers. But at the same time, when you start talking about more money in the coffers, there's more services required.
Yes.
And now you get into the question, what's the balance between residential and commercial? Because one of the problems we're having in town is, how do you get a job to afford to live here?
Yes. Yes, I think you're exactly right. Affordability, you asked what at the outset, what are you hearing on the street? And affordability is a huge one. So how do we ensure that people who work in our city can afford to live in our city? That's a really big question, and it's something that I think about professionally, and so it's also something I've been talking with residents about. And particularly, I think one of the populations in our city that this question is on their mind are maybe people who are now past their working age, but I've talked to a lot of folks who are retired, who have owned their home in Beverly for 40, 50, 60 years in some cases, and what they're saying is, we're ready to downsize and to sell. There isn't a good, affordable next step for us. Yeah. And so, I think part of what's on the horizon too is, I know there was a housing study done by the city, which I think is a great tool to lead us forward. Definitely revealed that we need more affordable housing at all levels and for people who work in our city, which you're raising. And I think also really grappling with that fact that we've got a lot of older folks or people who are just on the cusp of retiring, thinking about that question, where's my next step if I want to stay in the community I've been a part of? How can we address that need? Turtle Creek and Turtle Woods are wonderful, affordable housing for retired folks, but the wait lists for those are long, and I think that speaks to the need. But it also underscores that we don't have a good next step for a lot of people.
We've had both Andrew DiFenza and Jason on the show.
Oh, yep.
Talking about affordable housing.
Sure.
And there's really two issues involved. One is the 40B definition of affordable,
yes,
which turns out to be about $1,800 a month.
Right.
And then there's really what you can afford to pay kind of thing. And the twain never seems to get resolved. And as Andrew has pointed out to us a couple of times, the exact same thing. There is more demand than we've got capacity.
Yes.
So even though we're meeting and exceeding the 40B minimum required,
yes,
we still don't have a solution to the problem.
Yeah.
So one of the issues comes to mind on the web today. You can go to Amazon and buy a container house for $40,000 delivered, 1 bedroom. Would you be interested in a zoning change that would permit something like that?
Yes, I think talking about our zoning, and we've already seen a little bit of this and how it can be effective. We've seen the city council that's currently sitting just recently make a change to our inclusionary zoning that's allowed for sort of more interspersed affordability with full market value. But I do think that talking about our zoning and thinking about it creatively, are there places where we want to make these changes? And what you're alluding to, but correct me if I'm wrong, is that we could change our zoning to allow for smaller plots of land to have smaller homes on them. And if we could do some of those kind of creative out-of-the-box things, is that a way? And I think it could be to approach some of this affordability problem, because ultimately, with the zoning we have, we're going to reach a limit of what we can provide. And I think you're right. And it's at the same time, too, I think Beverly has been, and I would really like to see us continue to be, a regional leader on affordability, because we alone, Beverly alone, even though we're thinking about it and talking about it, won't be able to solve the affordability issue, because it's really a regional issue. So, I really applaud that the mayor has entered into this memorandum of understanding with Peabody and Salem, but I would love to see us continue to take the lead on that and to expand that to some of our other neighbors, because if just 1 or 2 or 3 municipalities alone focused on this really heavily is important, but affordability is sort of a regional issue, and so if we could continue to lead and spread that.
Very quickly get into the issue of, if you build it, they will come, and if we're the only ones providing more affordable housing, we're going to start to attract a large crowd of people, and that's why I keep coming back to the idea of, if they're going to live here, how do they earn enough to be able to pay the rent and eat
Sure.
and do a few other things.
Sure.
So that's where I keep coming back to the issue that there has to be a changeover to, yeah, it's nice to have another apartment house on Rantoul Street, but we need something to support the income, like another Cummings Center, like what's happening up on Dunham Road.
Yeah.
And what's the next one? Could Folly Hill be a piece of that action? Could that zoning be redirected? Because it's very close to the highway. Cell Signaling is doing a very nice job taking over the old King's Grant.
King's Grant, yeah.
And this area could be another Cherry Hill.
Yeah, you know, when we talk about affordability and what you're talking about too, about making sure that people who live in the city can afford to, or work in the city can afford to live in the city, you know, I think that that's something that Beverly's history really reveals that we've understood for a long time. I think you're raising the question of how do we tackle it now? So,
Yeah.
you know, I think about the neighborhood I grew up in, where my parents still live, is over by the high school, and it was shoe worker homes.
Yeah.
And so, you know, and of course, all those neighborhoods near that Shingleville neighborhoods was born out of the understanding that you need to have homes at all levels that are affordable for workers. And so Beverly, I think, has this sort of deeply entrenched history of understanding that principle, and I would love to see us continue to wrestle with it as you're talking about.
It came to a screeching halt when the shoe went down, and I haven't seen much happen since then. So there's been a hiatus that has built up a head wall against us.
Yeah. Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about sanctuary cities.
Sure.
We know what's going on in Salem with the sanctuary city.
Sure.
And I know on your church you have a big banner that says, "All immigrants welcome."
Yes.
That concerns me because in light of some of the things that have happened throughout the country, and the fact that we have open, porous borders, I think we need to, as you say, take a pause and say, wait a minute, who are the people that are coming into our country and into our communities? I think when you have a welcome to all immigrants, maybe that's not the best way to approach it, because we know that all immigrants are not here for the betterment of our country. So how are you going to deal with it, particularly if we start seeing some of the problems that Salem has with the gangs and some of the community residents who are not citizens and who are being arrested for drugs, for driving without licenses, causing havoc, injuring people. So as a city councilor, if it came up to a vote as far as becoming a sanctuary city, how would you deal with that?
So I am going to answer your question. I'm just going to back up just a little bit because I think you raised the banner on this church, and so I just want to honor that you lifted that up and just respond. So I think from the church's perspective, and I'll just I'll go down that path a little bit. You know, that banner went up around Christmas time last year, and really was born for the church out of the faith story tradition about Mary and Joseph and Jesus having to flee to Egypt, sure. And so being themselves refugees, yeah. And thinking particularly about that already in our community, already in Beverly, we know that there are refugees and immigrant populations that are living here, and so extending based out of that story, letting them know that they are welcome to come, you know, to be in our church, to come into that building. And, you know, I think when it's come up at a few community forums, particularly the Multi-Faith Coalition Forum, this issue got touched upon. And one of the things that I was talking about as I think about the sanctuary question is that I grew up in Beverly, and I really love this city. And I definitely see that its population has changed. And I look at my son's first grade class, and it's much more diverse than any class that I was ever a part of. And I think that can really be, I think it is for the good and for the better. And so my perspective on how welcoming or inclusive I think the city is limited, right? Because I'm a white woman, native-born American citizen, and so I am not someone who's likely to encounter barriers or hostility around my being a part of the Beverly community. And so I was alluding to the fact in that forum, and this is sort of where I go when I talk about sanctuary, which is we already know that we have immigrant and refugee populations here. We have people with skin colors that are different from mine. And my feeling is their experience of living in Beverly, what it's like for them to live here, is really the expert testimony that I would want to hear and understand to guide me in this process, because I can say, I think Beverly is a relatively welcoming place, and yet I'm not the one who's living the reality that they're living. And so I think until everybody who lives and works and goes to school in our city can say that they feel safe living, working, and going to school in our city, then we do have work to do at the city level. These conversations I think we need to have, and letting some of those voices inform us about what it's like.
But do you think these people in and of themselves, who hopefully are here legally, are concerned about people coming here illegally and not being able to vet them? We don't know where they're coming from. We don't know what diseases they may be bringing in with them. I would think that the city, the whole community, would be concerned, because we don't know who they are. We don't know, and as we've seen in different parts of the country, particularly what happened in New York. This fellow was here. Everybody thought he was a wonderful person and whatever, and yet he jumped in a rented van and plowed into and killed 8 people and injured more. So those are the kinds of things that people, I think, don't want to realize that it's happening right in front of you. This is New York. We've had the marathon bombing in Boston.
Sure.
So everybody, as much as you want to be welcoming and make sure everybody is happy and whatever, not everybody appreciates that. And they're not all here to become good, upstanding citizens. And I think as soon as people begin to realize, hey, you know, some of these people are bad people, and what are we going to do about them?
Sure. You know, I think one of the points, as I'm listening, I'm thinking about what you're saying, and one of the things that I'm thinking about, and I think maybe a point that where we have some commonality is, you know, I think people who perpetrate crimes, people who harm other people, whether they are American citizens or not, whether they're documented, undocumented immigrants, refugees, whoever they are, if they're found to be guilty of perpetrating these kind of crimes, like you're talking about in New York City, then they should be held accountable. You know, I think I get a little bit worried when we think, correlation and causation. So this particular person in New York came here from Uzbekistan, was thoroughly vetted at the time. It's one of those things where, you know, he's been here, and we had the opportunity to vet him, and he was cleared to come into the country. You know, I think about American citizens who perpetrate crimes, and we don't necessarily know that they're going to do it until they do it. And so I think there's sort of two sides of the coin, which is our federal immigration policies. I think probably a place that we agree is that they need to be fixed. We might disagree about what exactly there is. You know, I would like to see a better path for citizenship for people who want to become American citizens. I think it can be a long and cumbersome path.
It is. And necessarily so. Yeah,
and so, you know, I would like to see some reform happen at that level. I don't think it's something that the three of us can solve. I wish we could. I wish we could around this table solve it.
Well, I think that we know we have problems. Every country has problems, good people, bad people. But my contention is, okay, we know we have problems with some of our own people. Why invite more? Until we can be sure that the people coming here, like many years ago when they came here, they were thoroughly vetted. And they came here to become good citizens. They didn't come here to kill us.
Well, I think that the issue really comes down to the differentiation between the documented and the undocumented. Again, it's a correlation versus cause and effect kind of thing. But when we had Esther Nagartha on,
yes,
she's an immigrant.
Yes.
She does very well. She's working on her master's doctorate from Capella, I believe.
Doctorate, yeah, I think
so
that's
she's
right.
very, very active in improving her condition. When we had the session over in the senior center 6 months ago now, there was a lady from Lynn who was also an immigrant from Nigeria, I believe. And she was rattling off what kind of success she's had and the kind of success different members of her family had. So I think the question of immigrants who come in through the system tend to do very, very well. Immigrants that come in under the cover of whatever.
It was a visa.
Visa, overstay the visa, whatever.
Yeah.
They end up in a situation where they can't get a green card. They don't get any benefits. They're on the wrong end of most of the decisions in the government. And they're in a really tough strait. So I think that's, like you said, the three of us aren't going to solve the immigration problem, but that's where the force has to be applied to make the system better so that people that are here, either you scoop them up and throw them out of the country, or you do something about making them citizens. You got to do something. But at the city level, I don't know what we can do about it. Yeah, you can say you're welcome, but if you can't get a job or you got to work under the table, it's not a system I think we want to encourage in any way, shape, or form.
No, the bottom line is you have to keep your citizens safe.
Sure, and I agree with you. And I think, even in the Salem sanctuary conversation, I think what we're seeing play out is, sanctuary in and of itself, although it has lots of connotations for people, is not designed to harbor people who have committed some kind of a bad act. So, there are lots of
I think we want to get beyond the point of, we don't want to turn Sanctuary City into a get-out-of-jail-free card.
And and I don't think
nobody wants to do that.
Sure.
But at the next level, when you start to think about how can we support these people locally, it's got to be some sort of under-the-table kind of job because they can't get a green card, they can't get an EOD.
I hate to interrupt you, but would you believe our half hour is almost up?
Oh, I actually don't believe that.
This happens every time you have a show.
So he knows. Yeah.
I'm going to get a sign pretty soon.
Okay.
But we have about 2 minutes left, Julie. So would you like to give a brief summary of why you're running and what you hope to accomplish?
Sure. Thank you. I am running for at-large city council because I have had 10 years of experience working out in the community, hearing from people about their needs, their hopes for the city, helping to connect young people with volunteer opportunities, helping them to discover how they can have a voice in their city. And I would love to have the chance to be able to lift up some of those voices and people that I've been talking to and working with and be able to work at the city level to be part of creating policy that could help to move our city forward. So some of the things that we've talked about today that I'm really thinking about are affordability, how we make sure that we have housing at all levels to support people who work and want to live in our city, how we attend to the fact that we have people in our city who have lived here for 40, 50 years and would like to downsize and need a next affordable step. I would love to be part of talking about how we can remove and reduce that kindergarten fee because we're one of the last communities in our area that has it. So, even though it is true, there's lots of other fees, and I would love to see public education get to a place where we didn't have to charge any. I think this one makes us an outlier. I'd love to see us be able to get to remove that fee, and it would really, I think, encourage even more families to want to be here and be part of our school system. And I'd love to talk about how we could take care of our trash, which we didn't get to today, and it's not glamorous.
No. I think we're going to have to end it there.
That's perfect. Thank you so much.
We want to thank you for being on our show.
Thank you for having me.
And good luck to you.
Thank you.
And we look forward to seeing more of you.
Thank you so much. Thank you both.
You're welcome.
And I want to thank the viewers for watching. This is the end of our candidate interviews. We've tried to bring you as many people as we could that were running not unopposed. We didn't have time to do everybody, and we apologize for that. But we tried to get almost everyone in that either had an opponent or was new. So we want to thank you all, and we want to hope that you watch our shows. And November 7th is Election Day, and we hope you will all go out to vote. It's an off-election year. However, it's important that you vote for the citywide offices. They help keep our city strong. So thank you, and we will see you next time.